So, traditional Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. To understand.
Atheist and agnostic, as well as many types of religious.
Hi, Preston.
Hi, Katie.
I sounded very exasperated. I mean, hi, Preston.
Hi, Katie.
I'm really excited about this episode.
So I thought of a name for this episode before we even started throwing content together.
Okay, well, lay it on me.
Well, she doesn't look Druish. Good old Spaceballs. I'm still waiting for the search for more money.
Well, we're going to find out why she doesn't look Druish on today's episode of The Holy Watermelon Podcast. Oh, boy.
It's a great way to start.
Great. We're doing another ancient religion. Today we are talking about ancient Celtic religion, which I was excited by, having grown up as an Irish dancer. But it's also way more complicated than I'd say almost any of the ones we have looked at, because
they're all complicated.
They are, but this one like really morphs into Irish folklore eventually.
Yeah.
And looks completely different from its original pantheon of gods, which is where I was like, this has a lot of branches to it.
Yeah, the Romans put a lot of work into making the Celtic religious tradition family really hard to study, and really pushed it into obscurity, which is weird because we're talking before the Christian conquest of the Celtic people. It's frustrating.
Yeah. And like you said, then it becomes this, at some point it almost becomes children's stories.
Pretty much.
And so where do you draw that line? And Celtic is a lot broader than Irish too, right?
Is,
so
a lot.
Yeah, I was doing all this research and wondering if I was researching the right thing, but I hope you all enjoy this episode. Nonetheless.
Yeah, the Celtic people basically originated in Western Europe. Basically anything west of Italy that wasn't south of Italy. Centralized in southern Germany and France, but the Celts also lived in Austria, Czechia, and most famously the British Isles.
Mm-hmm. Like the North Germanic peoples, we have very few written records about old Celtic religious traditions. And unfortunately, most of the old writings we have about Celtic worship come from Romans, including Julius Caesar himself.
Yeah. Before he decided, I am the god emperor of this ridiculous nation, back when he was just General Gaius, then he was, out fighting people and getting to know his enemies. And so the writings that we have from him about his enemies definitely are fully... what's the word I'm looking for? They're very heavily biased in a very negative way.
Yeah. Yeah.
The Romans spoke about all the foreign gods as though they were only foreign names for their own gods. We had talked about this a couple episodes ago. And when they were talking about the Gaulish and the Celtic gods, this makes it really hard to know who they're talking about, because they don't actually map onto each other terribly well.
No.
Which is really frustrating.
Well, then, of course, the Romans hated the Gauls.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we have the Christians who hate polytheism, which this is another polytheistic religion. We don't have any positive spins on this religion at all. And some are just outright propaganda to diminish this Celtic pantheon.
Yeah, it's frustrating. Very little remains of the Celtic cultural tradition outside of the British Isles today. And really the only exception to that is that tiny little corner of France that's trying really hard to reconnect to Ireland.
Yeah. And then again, I just want to point out that, again, I said already, it's a polytheistic religion. But when we do our wrap-up episode, it is the concept of a monotheistic religion is so weird at this point in time.
Right?
And that's something now It's gone the other way, especially if you live in the West, where a polytheistic tradition feels so weird. But no, everyone thought the Jews and the Christians were out of their minds.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting world that we live in.
Right?
Yeah. So diving into some of the nifty elements that are the Celtic religious tradition, which of course, like everything we've talked about for the last few episodes and any religious group, nothing is ever monolithic. There's always diversity of thought, especially in a tradition that covers such a large part of Europe.
Well, and again, no formalized writings.
Yeah.
Like all the other ones we've touched on in these past couple of months. No formalized writings, so there's nothing to go off of.
There's no Celtic Bible. That's just not the way it goes.
Nope.
We don't even have something that really mirrors the Eddas very well either.
There's like literally nothing on these people.
Yeah, which is rough. It's a lot of oral traditions that what we learn about them says that they would have been preserved in a way that should have been verbatim from generation to generation. But because there is such great diversity from east to west, from north to south, of the people that were called the Celts and the Gauls, it's not looking like it's really verbatim.
Well, and then this is where, like I said, I had trouble researching because we do start to have good written record of Irish mythology.
Yes.
Which is where, which comes from the Celtic pantheon, but there's not a lot on the Celtic pantheon.
Right.
So, anyway.
Yeah. So generally speaking, the Celts were pretty interested in what we call animism, that most pagan folk were interested in the spirits of trees and animals. This was something that we saw a little bit with the Norse, where they were worried about sacred lands, but this is much more a part of the Celtic life than it was for the Northern Germanic people, which of course shouldn't be too terribly foreign to North American white folk who happen to be living on stolen land.
Yeah, right? So, unlike the harsh line between sacred and profane that we see in the Abrahamic traditions, Celts believed that spirits were in everything.
Everywhere.
Everything and everywhere.
Like the land whites.
Mm-hmm. Lands and animals share names with the gods, which is one of the few ways that we know anything about some of these gods.
Yeah, it gets to be tricky business. The Celts were also particularly concerned with how animals behaved, considering almost any potential act to be an omen either for good or evil. And if you've paid a lot of attention to anybody who believes in gods today, this is still the way a lot of people behave, taking all kinds of things as signs from the gods.
Totally. Yeah, animals and the gods are always tied up, even if you think of like temple sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Hmm.
It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Good thing we're apex predators.
Just watched the movie, I can't remember the name of it now. It's basically the story that Moby Dick was based off of, the true story.
Oh.
And whales are awful. They are brutal and mean sometimes.
Killer whales are very mean.
Sure. I think this one was mostly focused on sperm whales.
Oh, interesting.
I think. I could be misremembering that. But yeah, they weren't even after the killer whales. They were after the big dark whales. Oh. Yeah. With their goofy little flappy underjaw.
Isn't that just Thor Ragnarok, the Dark Elves?
Sure, why not?
Okay.
So there is only minor evidence anciently of what might have been called witchcraft among the old Celts. But the rise of Wicca in the last century does offer a little extra perspective into how people have preserved the old ways and brought them back to life. Whether or not they're faithful reproductions of what used to be going on anciently is an entirely different discussion.
Oh, we're going to get into that, though.
Yeah.
Unlike the Norse tradition, who had no defined priesthood whatsoever, the Celts had classes of priesthood, all of which were open to men and women alike, which we do see in modern Wicca.
Mm-hmm. Anciently, bards were more than just performers sharing songs and stories. And if you're at all familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, which I know at least some of our audience is.
Is it me? It's me.
Bards have a sort of magic. And I thought it was really interesting. Magic and poetry, music and poetry share magical properties. And that's a really important part of the Celtic tradition. And it does show itself a little bit in the Harry Potter universe, where you see that nobody's using English words for their spells. It's always a slightly poetic sounding Latin-ish. If it's not real Latin, it's something that's meant to sound like Latin.
Like lorem ipsum for my... Only a select few of you might understand that reference. I'm so sorry. It's graphic design filler text.
Yeah.
It's Latin-ish.
Yeah.
It looks like Latin, but it's not.
That makes perfect sense.
There you go.
I like cheese ipsum.
Ooh, pirate ipsum's a good one too.
Sure. If you're looking for filler text, there's actually a lot of great services online.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I thought that was really interesting that, like, I just thought it was D&D doing this weird thing to bards that made poets magical. But no, this is a legit ancient tradition. So that's kind of cool. However, most people see bards as the lowest level of Celtic poets, being more reciters than inspired writers.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, an undergrad student.
Sure.
Then there were the Fili, which were the seers. Actually, I thought we should put the pronunciation in for basically all the gods. And I didn't, so we might need to do some Googling. The Fili were seers, able to see the future and share their visions in poetic songs or riddles.
Yeah, I feel like that would get really annoying for the layman.
I
But,
feel like there's a pop culture character that does that, and I can't think of who it is right now.
For people who are familiar with the Hebrew Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, there's famously good old Isaiah, who talks in a very poetic voice a lot of the time and is pretty obscure for readers. So that's something that's reasonably common to religious folk today.
Mm-hmm. Because of the power of song, the Fili, their words and traditions survived the Christian conquest and were recorded by Catholic priests.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting reading up on these Catholic priests that were writing these things. Why they felt the need to preserve something that they really hated feels really, really odd to me. But I can appreciate that the need for decent scholarship was enough that they did a thing that needed to be done.
Interesting.
Even though they weren't doing it for properly noble reasons.
No enjoyment. There was no enjoyment there.
Yeah.
And in Ireland specifically, the Fili were counted as equals to Catholic priests, which meant that they received land from the chiefs equally. This became a hardship when pretty much anybody could become a Fili. So the title was restricted to only a few per family who were thought to have a special right to it.
Yeah, that could be a problem. And I think it's really interesting that they were counted as equal under the law. I mean, anyone could become a priest too, but that doesn't mean you were going to get a parish right away, you know?
No. I mean, again, this is probably part of the reason why it morphs into, like I said, the folklore, is that Ireland, like, still to this day, as Catholic as it is, they still have fairy trees that you don't cut down in your farmer's field. Kind of like in Iceland, where you have to get permission from the elves to build civic buildings. Like, it's the weirdest thing.
Yeah. I'm curious how that actually operates from day to day, because I haven't looked that up. Do they just put a petition in front of a spot reserved for the elves and see what happens?
I haven't looked into it either. I just know it's a thing.
All right.
But I did see fairy trees in Ireland where, like, in the middle of a field that, you know, here in Western Canada would be completely bare for grazing. It's like, nope, fairies live in that tree. Can't cut it down. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Cool. There is some question as to whether these are the same folks that the Greeks and Romans called the Vates, But in English, we call them ovates now because learning Greek is hard.
Yep.
I know that because I've done it. But that's an embarrassing adjustment of a word. But ovates is easy enough to say in English. So I guess there's that.
Yeah.
Druids. That's a word that I think should be a little bit more familiar. Were basically what we now know as priests in Celtic paganism. While there's little that we actually know about them, there is a magical element to them. Many of their practices would be what we consider occult, including divination and spellcasting. Just like other religious leaders of the time, they were also heavily involved in politics, medicine, law, and as information keepers. Basically, these were the guys that could read.
Yep.
But they didn't write things down.
Bitches.
Right? It's frustrating.
It is frustrating 2,000 years later. You are correct. Did you know, Preston, that they performed human sacrifices?
I mean, I've heard it about so many different peoples now that at some point we have to run across somebody that it's fully true.
It's not this one, though. So I really just think this is Roman propaganda for all of them. Or like Christian propaganda, I guess, because Rome, there were rumors that in the ancient Roman, they had human sacrifice.
Well, even the Greeks would say it about the Spartans, that they would just destroy all their weak-looking children. Turns out there's no truth about that either.
Weak looking. Oh, that's sad. I could just like picture little Timmy being like, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're a little scrawny." That's really upsetting.
But that was something that the Greeks would say about the Spartans, talking about their history, looking backwards, and yet we've found no evidence that it's true, and some pretty strong arguments that the people that were saying this were just being dicks to people they didn't like.
Yeah. So in reading up on this round of human sacrifice, basically some scholars even deny that it happened at all. It definitely didn't happen very often. If it did, and any instances of sacrifice were likely reserved for criminals.
Makes sense.
I mean, we still do that. So
right. Julius Caesar, back when he was just General Gaius, he actually said that one of the greatest things that he witnessed among the Gaulish people was that they would stuff people into these wicker men.
Oh, yes, the Wicker Man.
Right. And the Wicker Man is kind of cool, but does a giant effigy actually need flesh and blood people inside it? Isn't that the purpose of an effigy, is to not have the real thing inside the fake?
I mean, yeah, but even if they did, we burn people at the stake well into the 1700s. So
yeah, so Julius said that they would stuff criminals into the Wicker Men, but when they ran out of criminals, when they just had a light year and people were being good, Santa Claus didn't have any to bring coal to, they would throw slaves and thralls into the Wicker Men, which seems really odd.
Seems like a waste of labor.
Right? You need your slaves.
Yeah. I don't want anyone to have slaves, period. But I don't want anyone taking my manpower, my paid manpower.
Right? But this is a thing that people are saying about the old Gaulish people, just like they were saying about everybody else in the neighborhood.
Literally everyone has performed a human sacrifice.
I mean,
if we take what's been written, everyone has performed.
I mean, human sacrifice is still a everyday occurrence in Texas today. Thank you, government. But of course, these are criminals.
Preston goes political. Pew, pew.
In Canada, human sacrifice is fully illegal, and in many countries, it is still totally acceptable.
Yeah.
Just a reality. I'm not getting political about it. That's the reality. So back to the Druids. They're generally thought to have had something that looks like a mystery school, but those mysteries are now lost to time. If such an oral tradition had survived to the present day, some people claim that it has, that would make him the only people in the world to preserve that as a secret rather than have it leak out. So we're basically looking at the Bigfoot of religious studies.
Cool.
It's so tricky business. And of course, in most literature since the medieval era, Druids have been portrayed as malevolent sorcerers who oppose the advance of Christianity. The second half of that makes perfect sense, since the Christians destroyed and conquered their way of life, but making them malevolent sorcerers just seems like an unnecessary negative set of baggage there. But in the last couple hundred years, neo-Druid groups have popped up, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later.
I mean, we've all watched Outlander, so.
I haven't watched Outlander.
Oh, well, you're missing out.
Okay.
It's really meant for the ladies, but
I accept.
there's a
your
lot of
summary.
gore, though.
Yeah? Okay.
I fast forward for the gore. Get to the sexy parts.
That makes sense.
Yeah. The descriptions we get about the Druids make it look like they ran theocratic tribes, but it makes more sense that in smaller tribal groups there wasn't much reason for the more senior members not to have a familial respect for the whole community, allowing them to lead in both civic and religious affairs, which is a tricky distinction to preserve.
Indeed it is. There's the natural state of having the old people that know how to read leading things. That makes sense, but being both civic and religious leaders looks problematic.
I mean, it's a historical fiction novel. Like, I recognize this. But the way they wrote the Druid part of the book is that you had your chieftain and then you had your high priest, Druid, high Druid.
Sure.
And they would lead together. The chieftain would defer, like the Druid was his counselor.
That's what we see in a lot of cultures.
And if the Druid said, we need to sacrifice a baby, the chieftain would go, okay, we need to sacrifice a baby. And they'd sacrifice a baby.
Yeah. When your role includes a connection to the future sustainability of your people, and everybody sees your religious leaders in that position, you end up having a lot of civic authority.
Yeah. So the Tuatha Dé Danann translates to folk of the goddess Danu. She is the mother goddess in Irish folklore. So again, this weird blending of Celtic into Irish because there's no records. So she's the mother goddess in Irish folklore, though some associate her with the land itself, so calling the land Danu. There are no legends about her specifically, but she lends her name to this ancient Irish pantheon of gods.
Okay.
The Dé Danann dwell in the other world, but visit us through passage tombs like the one at Bóinne, which is older than Stonehenge and really fucking cool. I went to Bóinne.
Cool.
And yeah, it's from like 5,000 BC, I think. And they figured it out. The light in the passage tomb, it's illuminated on the equinoxes.
Nice.
And you can't actually get into Bóinne on the equinoxes. You have to win your way in. You have to enter a draw.
Well, because so many people want
Because so many people want to in. I entered the draw. I did not win.
Makes sense.
I would have flown back to Ireland, though, because how fucking cool would that be?
Right.
Sorry, I got real nerdy there. Yeah, so it's way older than Stonehenge. Doesn't get nearly as much credit as Stonehenge. Google Bóinne.
We're going to include the spelling of that. So
Sure,
that you
can also look up Newgrange, which is spelled just like it sounds. That's the anglicized version.
That's helpful.
Yeah. So, like in Norse and Greek mythology, the Dé Danann are not the first set of gods, but rather descended from Nemid.
Oh, yeah.
Scholars believe that the story of Nemid is euhemerism and that he was a real person.
Nice.
So,
it's cool when you can spot that in religions.
right. There are other supernatural races in Irish mythology that have some relation one way or another to the Dé Danann. The Aushi are the descendants of the Dé Danann. The Fomorians are an evil race that fought the Dé Danann. And the Fir Bolg were ousted from Ireland by the Dé Danann. and the Milesians. Milesians.
Part of me wants to say Malaysians, but that's not
No,
right.
it's not Malaysians. The Milesians are the final race of the present-day Irish people who arrived after. They struck a deal with these gods and split Ireland above and below ground. The present-day Irish people obviously got the above ground. I hope I don't need to clarify that.
The dwarves and the elves are underground, and the fairies.
Yeah, everything's underground except for humans.
I think we got a pretty good deal there. 'Cause
Yeah.
we need sunlight for happiness and health.
But everyone below ground is magical, so
So they're probably fine.
they're probably fine. But then did we get the short stick? We got light and they got magic? That sounds like an unfair deal.
Oh, rough. Okay. Unfortunately, very little is known about the deities of the Celtic and Gaulish tradition because there are very few written records, as we mentioned before. But we do have some decent oral traditions that the Druids were able to keep alive, and a bunch of place names are able to preserve these names as well. But not always helpful in telling us what they were gods of.
Nope.
Yeah, there are some that remain from the broader Celtic tradition, and then we have lots that are specifically Irish from the Tuatha Dé Danann tradition.
You start so I can tell the story.
Ooh, okay.
You start with the Dagda.
All right. The Dagda is basically the Allfather, associated with agriculture, fertility, manliness, and of course, in the Celtic tradition, magic and wisdom. He's another bearded man, and the husband of Morrigan, the lover of Bóinne, and he has 7 children. So we got Angus, Brigid, Bov, Durg, Kermit, Eid, and Midir.
We really should have put pronunciations on it.
Those look legit to me.
Okay. Carry on.
So the Dagda carries around a club of life and death. You know what? That makes sense. A club can save a life or bring death.
I mean,
I
yeah.
like it. So the one end of his club gives life. The other end can brutally destroy you.
Cool.
Yeah. He resides at the beautiful Bóinne, as you had mentioned earlier.
I definitely added the word beautiful because I was so excited about it. Thanks for reading it, Kristen.
I'm happy to read the words you give me here. In a challenge from their opponents, the Fomorians, the Dagda successfully finished a meal from his cauldron of plenty that was known to produce a bountiful feast. Good deal.
World's first competitive eating.
That reminds me of a story of Thor where he was given this trick mug that he was supposed to finish the mug. Turns out it was a big-ass straw piped straight into the ocean.
And he did it.
And he did
Fucking
it.
did it. This is that.
Yeah.
So the Morrigan, her name translates to Great Queen or Phantom Queen. Like Athena, she is the goddess of war, which I love all these strong women being the goddess of war.
Right? Well, every time we see a male god of war, they're always, what's the word I'm looking for? Clumsy and brutal and totally devoid of strategy or any sort of useful wisdom. But that's not what we see in the women. Every time a woman is a goddess of war, she's great.
Good at it. I had to pee in a shop bathroom yesterday, and I could tell that no woman had entered there ever before me. And I thought of your Masonic Hall, and I was like, I don't know how men run the world. I really don't. It's the grossest place I've ever been.
I'm sorry you had to experience that.
I'm sorry, I had to be there too, but I did. But yes, anyway. She is also, the Morrigan, is also the goddess of fate, and she could foretell victory or defeat in battle. She is a shapeshifter, commonly found in either the form of a raven or an old crone, if she's not her war goddess self. She has also been described as a tripartite goddess or three goddesses in one. And this actually happens a lot in the Celtic pantheon, which I found very interesting. The names of the three goddesses vary. We always have Bav, Macha, and either Nimain, Anand, or Danu. But I couldn't find anyone that agreed on that third one. So, as always, we have a fun little story about one of these gods and goddesses. In this case, we have one about the Morrigan. And she features heavily in what is known as the Ulster cycle of Irish folklore. So again, this is where religion starts to blend into fairy tales, essentially. Kind of like Santa Claus in the West, right? He was based on a saint, and now he's a fairy tale. Mm-hmm. Or he's real. I don't know who's real. I don't know who's listening.
He's also dead.
I don't know who's listening, but he's real. So these stories take place around the time of Christ in the 1st century, but manuscripts date much later, from anywhere from the 12th to 15th century, though these stories are likely to have been passed down by oral tradition for much longer. So the first time Morrigan saw Cuchulainn was when he was defending the province of Ulster from Queen Maeve. Cuchulainn is basically Irish Hercules, for brevity's sake. He's demigod, very strong, very hunky. For Morrigan, it was love at first sight, and she tried to seduce Cuchulainn. But despite her godly and womanly ways, he rejected her, Preston.
Ouch.
Yeah. However, she was not deterred. She used her shape-shifting powers to turn into an eel and swam to where Cuchulainn was in a fjord and tripped him up with her eel body. Mostly embarrassed, at least I imagine, he starts to punch the eel Morrigan, so she shapeshifts into a wolf. While in her wolf form, she ran at a herd of cattle to drive them into the direction of Cuchulainn to trample him to death. Fortunately for him, he grabbed his slingshot and temporarily blinded the Morrigan when he shot a stone in her eye. Again with the cows, she transforms to join them to get the stampede heading to Cuchulainn again. He gets away, though, because he's Irish Hercules. He breaks her leg with a stone, and she accepts defeat. For now. Cuchulainn goes to his battle and wins, and on his way back, he comes across an elderly crone milking a cow. The crone was, of course, blind in one eye and had a leg injury. The crone offered the warrior some fresh milk while he drank, and he blessed her in thanks, unknowingly restoring the goddess to her full strength. Now, Morrigan didn't attack, for she was happy to be restored. But it is said that when Cuchulainn eventually died in battle, a raven was said to have landed on his shoulder. Dun, dun, dun.
Like right before the killing blow or afterwards in mourning his death?
Is in a mocking, this was meant to happen to you.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Rough.
Yeah, there you go.
Huh. Fun story.
Was it? Lots of animals.
Yeah. There's a lot of shapeshifter gods.
I mean, I think it's a way that you could actually, like, visualize your deity.
I guess.
Is that a crow or is that Morrigan?
Right. There's a pretty strong tradition in some parts of the Christian world that are kind of odd in this way, that say that Jesus is also a shapeshifter and that he can be anything at any time and you never know when he's right around the corner. It's kind of weird.
And then I'll just add in really quickly before we go on to Brigid. Morrigan's also in the Arthurian legends, and she's very similar to the Celtic goddess, so you can see again how it went from gods and religion to folklore. And change, right? That's a very British versus a very Irish telling of the Morrigan.
Well, the Bretons and the Celts and the Gauls and all that, they're related peoples with similar mythology between them. And it just makes sense that the Arthurian legend would include something like that. All right, next on our list, Brigid or Brigid, the Exalted One. Brigid is the goddess of healing, fertility, and motherhood. Her role in fertility and motherhood extended to animals as well. So she also is associated with domesticated animals. That just makes sense. The celebration of Imbolc is in her honor at the beginning of February, the start of the Old Irish calendar. And she is considered a solar and fire deity, represented by her red hair. Now I'm just thinking of the girl from Brave.
I mean,
it makes sense.
you're not far off.
Right? And also, this is reflected in the meaning of her name. The Catholic Saint Brigid is believed to be just a Christianization of this goddess. And this happens a few times. There are a good handful of Christian saints that are definitely just syncretizations of gods to keep people happy as they're forced to adopt a new religion.
Well, and Brigid is kind of like Thor, where while she's not one of the top two, we have a ton of writings about the goddess Brigid.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I can totally see how they're like, oh, we'll just put a saint in front and make her a good Catholic woman, and ta-da!
Yeah, and now your tradition is validated into this new system that we're going to force down your throat.
Then we have Lug, who is also a very popular...
Is it Lug or Loof? A GH is a weird thing that
well,
is
because
so
you say
inconsistent.
because you say Lugnasa, not Luftnasa.
All I can do is take your word for it.
I think it's Lug.
Okay.
Anyway, someone's going to come on and...
Go ahead and correct us. We're okay with it.
Yeah, it's true. He's the god of justice, oath-keeping, and the nobility. He is a prominent god, with his holiday being Lugnasa, which is August 1st. He is also known as a trickster, even though he is the god of justice, and was known to deceive his opponents to get his way. Odd, right?
This is incongruous.
Yes. I feel like he and Loki would have got it. Loki would have been like, I like your style.
I guess.
Yeah, he would. He'd be like, I see what you did there. He's also said to have invented many Irish games, including horse racing and Fidchell, the Irish precursor to chess. Luke's son is Cuchulainn, so the hero I just told you about. And again, this is where religion starts to bleed into folklore and tales.
Is horse racing a game that the Irish claim is theirs?
I mean, I don't know. That's what the thing said. Okay. I can see the Irish doing that.
Oh, well, yeah, sure. But, I mean, I also have an issue with saying that chess originated in the West, but if Fidchell is an old Irish game, then that's the way it goes.
It's probably wrong. I can say that as an Irish person. They're probably drunk. Again. I can say that as an Irish person who was drunk last night. Oh, dear.
Next on our list, we have Angus, the god of love, poetry, and youth. It's nice to see a man as the god of love and poetry.
I thought so.
I mean, we did have Eros as, like, a half-ass god of love in the old Greek tradition, but it was mostly his mom's job, Aphrodite.
Totally.
And poetry...
He was just Aphrodite's little bitch.
Kinda.
Yeah.
And poetry has been ascribed to a decent variety of gods over history, but Angus is a pretty good symbol for bringing these things together. He's the son of the Dagda, and he resided at the Bóinne as well. He had the power to resurrect the dead, which is pretty awesome.
That's pretty potent.
Yeah. I'm curious how many instances we have in history of this happening in Ireland or even the entire Gaulish region. And again, he is a shapeshifter known to transform into a swan. So birds are his favorite, and he would transform kisses into birds.
Aww.
You know, you blow a kiss to a friend and then it actually hits them in the face in the form of a dove. That'd be great.
To you, dear listener. Caca!
So, because he's a god and the god of love, he is pretty much always pictured as a very hunky man, but also surrounded with birds, because that's his thing.
It's also worded like that because Katie wrote that. And poor Preston had to read it. Now we have two. I mean, there's not a lot of details on these guys. I'll just lump them together and you can move on to the other deities. I felt them noteworthy because of their parallels or their importance, but there's literally no records on these guys. So Manon Mcclear was the Irish sea god, guardian of the underworld, and rides a sea chariot. Does that sound familiar, anyone?
That's our soggy boy.
That's our soggy boy Poseidon. So I thought that was interesting. And then we have Nuata. He's the first king of the Tuatha Dé Danann. He got a silver hand after losing it in a battle to the Fomorians. He is the husband of Bóinne, so he's cuckolded by the Dagda. And he's associated with hunting, fishing, and leadership. So I felt like that was noteworthy. So you know where Bóinne came from, and he's the first king, and he's cuckolded.
Yeah. What a great history to have a whole nation look back on with pride. Yeah, so there are other gods that are not part of the Tuatha Dé Danann. They're thought of as the older gods, but because of this, we also have a lot less information about them.
I actually, I had a whole list, and then when there was one sentence on each of them, I was like, well, I guess we're not talking about this guy. So there's only 3.
Well, we've got Cairnanos, the Antlered God, the precursor to the horned god that we see pretty solidly represented in the Wiccan tradition. Interpretations vary on what he represents, everything from animals to travel. It's kind of messy.
Yeah. When you're that old and there's literally just carvings of you, people can make up whatever they want.
Yeah.
Then we have Taranis, the god of thunder. His name literally means thunder. It comes from the Proto-Celtic word Taranos. Taranos. He could control storms. He was in a triad of gods with Tutatis and Isis. Also known as Turian in the Irish tradition, there is not much known about Tutatis and Isis. Some think it's the triad god situation, though. Couldn't find anything else on them.
Okay. And another one, my favorite.
Everyone's favorite.
Epona.
Nay.
Epona was a horse girl. And if you know horse girls, you know what that means. She's a goddess of horses, a protector of horses, donkeys, and mules. She's also the famous horse, steed of Link in The Legend of Zelda.
That's why she's named that. Yeah.
That name is definitely taken from this tradition. Worship of Epona was pretty widespread, which is kind of interesting for the time, as a lot of people worshipped really centralized, local, specific gods and goddesses. Her tradition is a little wider than one would expect.
Yeah. And quite well documented as far as, especially for something this old as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot in the old Celtic tradition. And then there's even more that's been lost, which is kind of sad. Yeah,
there's a very depressing blank in a lot of the knowledge that we should have about these people.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the last 3 episodes, we were talking about neo-paganism and what it looks like now, and this one got quite interesting. Part of me was, they do it now. It was the one sentence that we've repeated the last 3 episodes. But this one's really interesting because Wicca kind of folds into this, even though Wicca is a 70-year-old religion, and the lines that are drawn, I guess.
It's separate but connected.
Yes, and there's actually, I found 4 sort of distinct classes of Celtic neo-paganism that we'll talk about. So these are not all the same, but they're all definitely similarities, and we're kind of going to go from the most traditional to Wicca.
All right.
Is how I've outlaid this out. So you have Celtic Reconstructionist paganism. And this is focused on the historically accurate,
tricky,
right? Reconstruction of the polytheistic tradition. This is a genuine belief in the pantheon, much like the Greek restoration that we talked about a few episodes ago. But there's less worry that we're going to get into. They're big on the revival of Celtic culture as a whole, including music, dance, and language, in addition to the folklore. Because so little has survived for us to even put together an episode, they stress individual research and study, but also see the value in spiritual practices. They give offerings to the spirits and celebrate all major pagan holidays like Samhain and Involk.
Sounds pretty all right. Tricky. Super hard to be good at. I mean, let's be fair. A lot of people are terrible at Christianity, and that's been well established for a couple thousand years.
I mean, there's been a few councils about doctrine too.
Right. But Celtic Reconstructionist is just hard.
It is hard, and I think it's hard regardless, but there are people smarter than us out there.
Yeah.
Right, in this particular subject. Maybe not in everything. Right? So if you're like really into it, like we put this together in a week, you know, as we do. If you really wanted to deep dive, I'm sure there's more, but it's still tough.
Yeah.
Then, next step up is Druidry or Neo-Druidism. Not to be confused with Dudism.
Important distinction.
Yes. This is similar to Wicca in that it celebrates the connection to the natural world. There's no historical link between the OG Druids and Neo-Druids. Neo-Druids believe in the Awen, or the flowing spirit in all things.
Easy enough to get on board with.
Yeah. And again, they celebrate all major pagan holidays.
Makes perfect sense.
But this is also where I can see people getting confused, right? There's 4 different groups, probably more, that celebrate Samhain.
There's loads of different groups that celebrate Christmas and Easter.
That's
so
true. Katie
I take no issue with that.
Fair. But we do not lump them all together.
Right.
So. Then we have Celtic Wicca, which is very similar to modern day Wicca, but they believe in the full ancient Celtic pantheon, not just duotheistic Wicca.
Sure.
So it's very similar to Gardner's Wicca. Gardner's Wicca is duotheistic, and Celtic Wicca is pantheistic. Again, they celebrate all the major pagan holidays.
I just don't see any reason why they wouldn't.
Everyone should.
Sure.
Can we have an Imbolc party?
Sure.
Okay.
It wouldn't. I don't think it would be a faithful Imbolc party, but it could be an Imbolc
We could
party.
sacrifice a baby. I'm kidding.
That sounds like a problem.
I'm kidding. And then just to tie a nice bow on all of this and to move along swiftly from that comment, there's Wicca, which we did a full episode on if you want to jump back and listen to it, but it was developed in the 1950s with inspirations from Celtic paganism, like the holidays, but is a typically duotheistic religion with the horned god and I don't remember the goddess.
The triple goddess.
The triple goddess. Thank you.
Yeah, there's unfortunately not a lot more that we could include here. There's just so much that's lost to time. There's stuff like some small groups talk about this thing, but there's really not a lot. They're not one giant homogenous group, because there is no one giant homogenous group, as we've seen as we've made these explorations. But it's interesting to see how they have a lot of similarities to the Norse, being both Germanic peoples. The Celts and Gaulish were the West Germanic, and the Norse were North Germanic. And there are similarities that we see between the two groups, and yet they're both really quite different from what we saw in Greece and Rome.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is a great example of just geography affecting religion.
Yeah.
Right, because Greek and Roman are so similar, and Celtic and Norse are so similar.
Yeah. Some pretty cool stuff.
But they're all going to get usurped by Jesus right away, so...
Yes, unfortunately, we've watched a pretty brutal conquest looking back in history. of how all of these traditions and their really great stories are just kind of buried, and many of them never to be seen again by the Christian conquest.
You want to wrap up this episode?
All right, so we've got our Patreon, that we've got a handful of exclusive episodes just for people who support the podcast.
With more coming this year.
I'm looking forward to doing more of those. We've got our shop where you can buy all kinds of stuff with a good and decent set of... with a good variety of great graphics representing our podcast and some of the ideas that we share. You can get them on shirts, tote bags, water bottles, mugs.
You name it.
Basically, if it's a thing that people normally get branded, it's available, and that's great. You can find us on Discord, join the chat, tell us that we said something incorrect or mispronounced something.
Probably.
We also post some great memes and some really cool infographics. I've found a pretty good collection of infographics for the last few episodes illustrating the family trees of the gods.
Bushes.
I mean, some of them are pretty bushy. Some good fun. And also you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all kinds of great
Anywhere
stuff.
your podcasts are cast.
I mean, I trust that if you're listening to our episode, you've found a way that you're comfortable listening to us.
Oh, hey, share with a friend, too. Share with a friend.
Definitely do that.
That would be helpful.
We would really appreciate that. And thank you so much for listening.
Peace be with you.
Enlightenment and salvation for
By the late Middle Ages, the Christian prophecy had fulfilled itself.
God is near.